Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. This morning's special guest that we have with us, and is always an honor, we have Laura Matter, the Garden Hotline Educator, speaking on the topic of appreciating and reviewing the growing season in your garden. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
Thanks for having me again. This is the last of our series for the year, which is amazing. We've been doing a class every other month. We're going to continue that trend in 2024 with some similar material and some new material. So join us for that as well. Today we're going to go through thinking about what happened in your garden this past growing season. But I'm also going to run us through just some basics about the important things to know about gardens and gardening in the Northwest. And then we'll have a special section at the end where I would welcome your input and your discussion about things that you saw and, noticed that happened in your own gardens, because I think we learn more from sharing with each other in the long run. So I want to point out that this is witch hazel blooming that I took a photo of many years ago at the Witt Winter Garden at the Arboretum at the UW Botanic Garden. And that's a wonderful garden to wander through, get an idea about things that bloom this time of year. And through the winter, we are really lucky in the Northwest to have such plants that we don't just go dead brown in snow. And we actually have a lot of life around us. So I would encourage you to get out and go take a look. There's also a winter garden in Tukwila as well. The Macadam, I think it's called, Winter Garden, and that's pretty cool too. All right. Okay. So we're going to start out with these 4 concepts about how to think about your garden as habitat. This is something I stress a lot, that when we garden, we are creating habitat on all different scales. So we're looking at even what's happening on a leaf, including what's happening in the whole landscape, in your neighborhood, in the city, beyond you. And all of that is how we look at a garden habitat and think about the scale of what we're doing, and everything we do affects that. Soil life is important. It is probably the most important topic for gardeners to discuss with people, because we want you to understand that what goes on underneath the ground is most important for keeping your plants healthy. It also keeps the planet healthy, because the storage of carbon in soil is helping to reduce effects of climate change. And then, of course, as gardeners, we always have all these things that we are worried about, things like too many weeds, or really bad weeds, or some insects, squirrels eating our crocus bulbs, whatever it is, we have things we need to manage. But within that, there's also ways to manage them where you use nature to your advantage, including encouraging beneficial organisms, wildlife, insects to be in your garden as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about climate and climate change, because our climate is changing. And as you go into the new year, it's something to be thinking about how you can adapt. And it may be that you saw things different this year, plants behaving a little differently than you have in the past as well. All right, so scale in the garden can be as small as a leaf, like this little lupin leaf that we see. There could be insects living right on that leaf. And so that's their home. That's what you're looking at when you're thinking about how to take care of that plant. It may be an individual plant, or it may be a full garden like this Bellevue Botanic Garden sunset photo, which includes huge 200-foot conifers and lots of other plants. There could be a great diversity of things going on, but there's always competition in the garden. So competition for space, light, and water is something that we're thinking about as we make choices of plant placement. How do tall trees and buildings in urban environments affect us? We get a lot of calls on the hotline about people who live in a house for many years with this beautiful sunny yard, and then a townhouse goes up next door and shades their yard. And now everything has changed. So their environment has changed and they have to adapt to that. Urban settings can often be space challenged. So there's lots of folks, lots more in Seattle, that live in condos and apartments, and they don't have a huge garden. They may have a balcony, may have nothing. They may just be growing on windowsills. We hear from a lot of people who actually are growing and trying to grow edible plants indoors, some of which do well, but some of them are, you have to be pretty creative. But you can also, create light setups in an urban setting if you don't have a garden outdoors. It's really important to think about integrating your garden into the rest of the neighborhood. The more everybody does diverse plantings, the healthier our cities are, because we create pathways for insects and birds to move through. And then realizing that there's different niches for different kinds of life in the garden. So a ground feeding bird is going to be on the grounds, going through your fallen leaves, and a heron will be perched on the top of your tree and be nesting up in the top of cottonwoods. So there's lots of different diversity, and that matters to scale. If you're trying to attract herons, obviously you need some really huge trees. If you're trying to attract chickadees, then you just need seeded plants, and insects, because they feed their young insects, and you need to have a lot of cover and shrubbery and things like that. So thinking about how you want your garden matters to how you build the scale of it as well. And then I wanted to share this really most interesting photo of all the different kinds of soil life that there are. There's microorganisms, macroorganisms like the worm that we're familiar with in the bottom right, and some of these other insects like different kinds of beetles. There's also all kinds of fungal organisms in the soil. And the Northwest soils are heavily fungal composed by nature. But of course, in urban settings, we've dramatically altered the soil. So it's not the same as what native soil would be in a woodland setting. But fungal soils are different than bacterial soils. You'll find those more back in the Midwest, out in the prairies. But it matters to how we garden. It matters to what plants work best here. And all of these critters are actually what's feeding your plant. So when we talk about feeding our plants, we're actually feeding the soil, and we're feeding all these microorganisms in the soil, which work on breaking down organic matter and mineral content and making that available to the plants. In some cases, there are actually symbiotic relationships where some kind of fungal organism will insert part of its hyphae into the root of a plant and actually exchange nutrients with the plant. They can't photosynthesize. They don't have the capability. And so they get sugars from the plant, and the plant then gets nutrients that they've been mining from the soil. So there's some miraculous things that are going on under our feet. We tend to think about, soil as dirt. We walk around on it like it's a carpet. It's not. It's actually alive, and it has a habitat of its own that we are trying to protect. Wendell Berry has been really instrumental in helping to really bring the importance of soil to the American public. And this quote from 1977, I think really speaks to what I'm saying here. If a healthy soil is full of death, it is also full of life, worms, fungi, microorganisms of all kinds. Given only the health of the soil, nothing that dies is dead for very long. Some of our master composters, they do extracurricular things beyond their training period that they do through tilth. And last night, was it yesterday afternoon, maybe Wednesday evening, they went to a company that does human composting and went to learn about that. So even there, of course, if we were to be buried in the soil, we would get consumed as well. But there are people that are doing human composting now, as well as all the composting we do, municipally with all our food and yard waste. Wendell Berry also was very instrumental in getting the tilth programs going. So all the tilth programs on the West Coast are a result of the visit he made to the Northwest back in the early 70s to talk to people who were interested in soil at the time. All right, so one of the ways to make your soil better is to add compost to it. Most of us know this. There is such a thing as too much compost, so just being aware that compost is organic matter. Healthy soil shouldn't be more than 5% organic matter. It needs all the mineral content, as well as water and air and all those microorganisms. If you have too much compost in there, it can tie up nutrients and make it less available to plants. But compost has a lot of benefits. It helps to store water in the soil. It's why it's used in rain gardens as a predominant part of the soil structure. It actually helps benefit soil structure by helping to open up clay soils or creating more water retentive sandy soils that have large pore spaces, and it provides habitat for microorganisms. You can make it at home. You can do that with a worm bin. You can do that with a yard waste bin. You can have like a tumbler that you mix things with, or you can purchase bagged or bulk compost that's made from all our municipal waste. Or you could do something really simple, like just chop and drop trimmings from your garden, and that will become mulch on the beds, but it also slowly decomposes into compost in place. Sometimes people just build a pile, so they have a cold pile in the garden that they turn periodically. More often you turn it, the hotter it gets, the faster the decomposition rate. But ideally, you're looking to build something that's going to be nutritious and beneficial for your garden. Can be used as mulch, can be used as an amendment, and it's super helpful for all ailing garden soils. So managing problematic residents. When I do a lot of talks about gardening for wildlife, and on the face of it, we're talking about how do you bring all the birds in and have fun watching chickadees and all the cool birds that are in the Northwest that come into your yard. But always there's questions about mammals that are problematic, like squirrels and rabbits and mountain beaver and moles and so we spend a lot of time talking to people about all the issues that they have in their garden. There's also lots of pest problems. So the picture you're seeing at the bottom here, I'm sure if anybody has grown kale, broccoli, cabbage, you've seen this guy. They're butterflies. They fly around in the spring. They're out usually by April, and they're gone now, but they're around until October. And they have multiple generations per year. This is what their eggs look like, this little cluster. So something to know how to identify them. This is the larva. That is the little caterpillar that eats your cabbages. And the adult doesn't do any damage. It's actually beneficial. It's a pollinator. So it has a good side to it. But they're very prolific, and they lay lots of eggs, and they have lots of these larvae that eat your plants. They're typically this bright green, blends into the plants that they're on. The darker you have, like a kale, a purple kale, they're going to be a little bit more noticeable, but they're still hard to spot. But knowing what this whole sequence of events looks like will help you to be able to manage them, because you can interrupt their life cycle at any point and keep them from coming back. And then we all have lots of weeds we struggle with. Bindweed is one of the most notorious of them that can get entrenched in gardens, entrenched in rockeries, along fence lines, especially where people share yards, and it's really bad on one side of the yard and you can't ever seem to get rid of it. They run by underground stem. And so those white pieces that you're pulling out of the ground are not roots, but stems. And any piece of those can regenerate, which is why it's so hard to get rid of. So these are just examples of some of the, the big problematic things. Rabbits have become much more prevalent in this area. In Seattle, we used to see them mostly over by Woodland Park Zoo and a couple of places, and not even necessarily just the Eastern Cottontail, but the ones that people were letting loose that they had as pets. Now these guys are everywhere. There are Eastern Cottontail rabbits in every neighborhood in the Seattle area, and I know out in all kinds of areas around Seattle as well. Just to say, mammals are the hardest thing to control. So we talk about insects a lot. People worry about insects a lot. Obviously, they can do a fair amount of damage, but mammals are harder to control because they aren't as easy to interrupt their life cycle. It's not like you're in a find a bunch of baby bunnies somewhere. Usually, you can find the eggs of an imported cabbage worm butterfly. And then, with mammals, sometimes what you have to do is trap them. There are rules about what you can and can't do if you want to actually take care and kill mammals. The Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife has actual pages about different problematic wildlife and tells you what the laws are about that. But then in any garden, we also have all the garden heroes. So we have all these critters that come in and help us to manage our garden. And really, as a gardener, you're part of what you should be doing. And this is why I stress habitat so much. Build a garden that creates habitat that will attract these to your garden. You could go to the store and buy lady beetles. The ones you buy are not native. If you build a garden that will attract them, you will attract native ones. And that's always a better deal in the long run. Hummingbirds pollinate, but they also eat a lot of insects. Ground beetles, some people just have aversion to insects in general, but know that these little black beetles that you uncover whenever you're pulling leaves or raking or weeding, these guys are fabulous slug and snail predators. They eat baby slugs and they eat the eggs. And so they can help prevent a lot of invasion of slugs. They actually farmers now build what they call beetle banks, which are when you're growing row crops, they build one long row that's sort of mounded and is full of native grasses. And this is basically habitat for ground beetles, who then come out during their feeding time, usually at night, and go out into the fields and eat the slugs and then go back home. And they put them every so often based on how far a ground beetle travels. And that's part of the way that they help to manage that. So they create habitat to bring them in. Bush tits come in huge flocks. This little one, it was on a quince shrub that was in a yard where I used to live in. I love this picture because it looks like it's glaring at me. It looks like those little Angry Birds, that game. And I think that having diverse set of plants, things that harbor insects, things that have fruit and berries and seeds, will bring any kind of songbird into your garden. Parasitoid wasps are kind of miraculous. These guys appear out of nowhere, usually in April too. They're present even before you start seeing aphids, and they know where to find them. I've seen them scouting in the leaf axil of broccoli really, really early in the spring. And they're down in there finding the aphids that are already present. And what they do is the female has, instead of a stinger, that's been developed into an ovipositor, an egg-laying device. She sticks it in the aphid, she lays an egg, and she flies off to the next one, does the same thing, and just, will cover all the aphids on a plant. And so those eggs develop inside that aphid, and they eat it from the inside out, and then they carve a hatch when they become mature wasps, and they pop out of there. It looks like a little submarine hatch, and they pop right out and fly out and do the same thing. Now, the thing that's really important about knowing this is that you could have an explosion of aphids on something, and if you're not paying attention and not looking closely, you may not see that there's evidence of these guys at work. And what you see when they're there are dead aphids that have bloated and turned tan in color, so they look bigger. They look very different than little green or black aphids that are running around. And they, if you go ahead and spray those aphids, you're also killing these guys. So you don't want to do that. Predators take a minute to get up to speed, just like any predator prey population. Takes them a while to get to a place where they're actually controlling the population. But give them a minute, let it go for a minute, and make sure that you're not actually killing beneficial insects as well. Lady beetles, this is the larva, this bottom picture, they look like little alligators. We get a lot of calls about these. People think they're bad bugs. We congratulate them and say, yay, you have lady beetles in your yard. That's a good thing. When they pupate, they actually sort of they will attach themselves to a leaf, like where this guy sits right now, and they'll start to look more like an adult. You'll see the part of the body changing and getting rounder and getting the spots on it. And they're very vulnerable at that point, and they can't get away from anything. So you spray the plant, you kill the pupa of the ladybug. So it's important to understand their life cycles, good and bad. So this is a stink bug over here, and no, it goes from egg to hatches out, a little hatchling, and then they have instars. So they have all these different nymphs until they become an adult. There's many different kinds of native stink bugs in the Northwest that have some detrimental effects on plants, but the ones that are more problematic are the things that are not native to the Northwest. So they are visitors who came here some years ago, like the brown marmorated and the southern green stink bugs. So those guys are not native, and they cause more damage. In particular, they like the southern green loves things like tomatoes, and sometimes you'll find a little hole in the tomato and it will be stink bug. They have saliva in their mouth that actually helps to break down the tissues, and then they can suck the juices out of your fruit, but it ruins your fruit because it makes it soft inside. But they go from eggs to, so here she's laying eggs, and they go from eggs into a small little insect all the way to adult. They change color as they do, they change size, but they don't change form in the same way that something that goes through complete metamorphosis does. So lady beetle goes from egg to this larval stage that I showed you, and then this is what the pupa looks like. See, it's starting to get a little bit change of shape. It still has the ridges, but eventually it'll turn into this adult ladybug here. And then the same thing happens with, of course, moths and butterflies, good and bad, like the imported cabbage worm, or something like this swallowtail or a monarch. They go from egg to larva to pupa to adult. But keep in mind, this is larva. This is a caterpillar. It's going to eat things. So you have to have some tolerance for letting these good guys also have a little bit of a meal, because they need something to eat. You can plant things that are specifically for them. Willows are very commonly used in the Northwest for native butterflies. There's an anise swallowtail butterfly that loves things like fennel. And then monarchs and milkweed, they are really tied to milkweed. All right, so climate and gardens. So we talk about climate, we're talking about big picture things, and then we also talk about weather. We'll look at that in a sec. But really what we're trying to do and think about here is, how do you protect your soil from drought, heat, flooding, freezing, all the things that can happen, in the course of a year. You want to make sure you have a good watering routine, and that means the best tools, the best system, not making it hard for yourself so that you don't water. So, one of the things we know is that as gardeners, that if I set up something that's really hard for me to water, I'm not going to water it very often, because that's just human nature. So we try to encourage people to think about how they're setting up their watering so that it will be successful and you will have an easy time doing it. Always important to choose the right plants for the right place. And then there's lots of mapping tools that can help you manage and think about what's happening with weather, and also what plant choices you should be making, like the WSU Ag Weather Net maps. And I'll show you a picture of that in a sec. the USDA plant hardiness maps, which show you sort of the cold temperature guidelines for plants across the United States. And then the sunset maps, which are part of Sunset Magazine, those are slightly different. They're targeted to areas, so you can look at Washington State specifically and see more microclimate kind of mapping where what's happening in Issaquah is going to be different than what's happening in Seattle versus what's happening in Federal Way, because all three of those places have a little bit different geography and exposure to Puget Sound or exposure to the mountains, which affects things. So all of those things are useful tools. And the USDA just came out with a brand new map. So this is the brand new USDA plant hardiness zone map, which puts Seattle and most of the surrounding area in zone 9A. If you get further into the mountains, it's going to change a little bit, but we used to be 8B and now we're 9A. And so, you know, this zone map has changed because our warming temperatures have changed. So it's showing, even now, you're seeing across the United States some areas that have started to become more, further north, become a little more semi-tropical. And you can see some changes in this next slide. These are the two previous maps, so 1990 to 2015. Those are the last two times a new map came out. So 2015 came out based on information from, I think, about 2007. It took them a long time to make the decision to create a new map. And politically, I think because climate change is a hot button topic, they didn't want to, you know, rock the boat too much. So it took them a long time. They've come out with one a little bit more quickly this time, but it's already changed again. So again, here in this 2015 map, we were in zone 8A. Now we're in zone 9. So you can see where zone 9 is on this map. This is a little bit different color scheme, so it's a little bit easier to see the changes, but you can see zone 9 along the Oregon coast and going south and some pockets in Eastern Oregon, but not in Washington. And now we are. So, you know, why this matters is because it matters as to what kind of plant choices you make, what things can survive here, what things are marginal, what things are going to do better, but it also will affect what plants you choose that maybe did do well here, but we aren't as cold, and maybe they need a little bit more cold winter than we can offer here. So just to differentiate weather versus climate, weather is short-term state of the atmosphere at any given time and place. And then climate is the long-term average of that weather in a given place. So people are watching the trends, seeing how things are changing. And these are the big zones that we look at as to where the earth is cold, where we live in a temperate zone, where it's warm, and where it's tropical. And these will shift, these boundaries will shift with climate change. So that's what we're looking at. Then there's also microclimates in your garden. So even, you know, given all the big picture, how the weather works in the Northwest, you may have an area of your garden that stays really warm because it's really like full of rocks, and all these rocks will absorb heat and radiate it back out to the plants. So that helps to mitigate colder areas. You may have a pond that can cool air in the summertime and keep things cooler around it. So things can that you have in your garden can affect the climate. Clusters of evergreen trees. I tell a story a lot, which actually has to do with my sisters here listening in today. And it has to do with property that she lives in that I moved into with her and her husband many years ago. And when they first moved in, on the parking strip were these large laurel trees. You know, nobody wants English laurel on the parking strip. So they planned to cut them down, but we went through a winter with those in place, and we parked our cars on the street right next to them. And anywhere the windows were on that side where the evergreens, laurels were, in the winter when cars got frosted over, those windows were frost free as compared to the stuff that was out on the street, which we had to scrape. And so unless it was a super, super, super hard freeze, maybe everything would freeze up. But those trees, because they're evergreen, they're continuing to photosynthesize, and they are exchanging gases, which warms the air around them. And so that little bit of warmth just next to the car made that difference. I've seen that happen in a yard I lived in Northeast Seattle, where all of my neighbors' lawns were frosty white in the wintertime when the frost hit, because they were wide open. My yard was ringed by trees, and I have a little tiny lawn there, and it didn't get frost when theirs did. It did if it got really, really cold. But again, I had enough trees around and evergreens to warm the air just in that pocket of garden. And so plants can be very powerful as to how they affect your garden, evergreen trees in particular. You could have low spots in the garden, high spots. They're going to have different microclimates in your yard. You could have different exposures to the sun. You could have a north side of the house. Like on my north side, it's just a little pathway, but it's shaded, and it's just some ferns and a walkway. That's it. I couldn't try to grow anything else over there if I wanted, unless it's really shady, shade tolerant. You could have something out that's really exposed to the wind. And in the Northwest, we get them mostly from the Southwest and then coming down from the North. Or you could have a really dry area like a parking strip that's just bound by cement on all sides and hard to water. That's one of those areas you want to think about what you're putting out there, because that's going to be harder to water unless you have an irrigation system. All right, so water, why water? Why is it so important? Well, it's crucial for our plant health. Plants are 80 to 95% water. All of the nutrients that come in through the soil go up into the plant through water and through this hydraulic system that plants have. The sunlight acting on the leaves and the exchange of gases actually creates a system that pulls the water up hydraulically. It goes up, it becomes nutrients through the process of photosynthesis, and then water moves it through the plants as well. So water is crucial. It's crucial to hold the plant up. Turgor pressure is a thing. If you ever see a sunflower that's wilting and you water it, you'll see it perk up immediately just because you gave it water. They breathe through the undersides of the leaves, and there are little stomata on the bottom that open and close in response to ions that are being channeled by water into the leaf surfaces. And so if you don't have that, they stay open, they can't close, and then the plant dehydrates. So this allows plants to cool themselves, to take in carbon dioxide, and then of course that provides us with oxygen, which we need. So how do you protect plants and keep them from drying out? Here's one way, is mulching. So mulching your garden is super important. Lots of people are doing this work right now. Leaves are falling everywhere. Other than the stuff that's in the curb, which, you might not want to use directly on your soil. That's a great product to send off to commercial composting. They have hot enough systems to break down all the hydrocarbons that might be in there and work that out. But mulching will inhibit weeds, of course, but it also conserves moisture and it mitigates soil temperature. So this time of year, it can help keep your soil warmer, and in the summer, keep it cooler. It adds a lot of nutrients, even wood chip mulch. Now, we think about wood chip mulch as something that's going to block nitrogen, which it can in just the top surface of the soil where it's interacting with soil life. But in general, even wood in the soil can be really healthy for soil because it adds habitat for microorganisms. And then wildlife, like this varied thrush, actually hunt in mulchy areas, and those black beetles, like I pointed out. So here's just some examples, like leaf mulch around your brassicas, and looks like they have some leeks in there. And then, wood chip mulch around your perennial beds. Then you can also employ living mulches. So it's getting a little late to plant cover crops. although the soil's still almost 50 degrees right now. So you could probably get away with planting things like cereal ryegrasses. But many plants are used in the summer as well. And it helps give the bed a break from growing plants, adds nutrients back into the soil. And most of the summer cover crops bloom and attract pollinators. But this time of year, we do it to protect soil from rain, from losing nutrients. The heavier it rains, the more compaction happens to the soil. The heavier it rains, the more calcium is washed out into lower levels of the soil that plants can't reach. And calcium is what affects acidity. So if you have less calcium, you're going to have more acidic soils, affects the soil pH. So that's why people apply lime. That's what adds calcium. But you can prevent all of that by putting cover crops over bare areas of soil. You can do this especially in vegetable gardens, but some people employ this even in, beds around their garden. I've seen people do this even around perennial beds that die back. A lot of things die back, and they plant some cover crops in there. A lot of the winter cover crops too, the pea family plants have beautiful flowers like this crimson clover you see on the bottom here. And then you can do mixes of cereal grasses and pea. And the right side, that's a rye and vetch mix. And that can grow to about, 4 feet tall at least, sometimes taller depending on the year. And it adds a lot of nutrient from the top growth, which is full of nitrogen, from the pea family, which has specialized nodules, which actually take in atmospheric nitrogen and then break that. When you break that open, it becomes nitrogen that's available to plants. So they have rhizobacteria in the root system nodules that convert nitrogen from the air into a form plants can use. So again, miraculous things are going on under the soil we don't even know about. We don't think about it, but it's all happening and benefiting us, and knowing about it helps you to manage it so that you can take advantage of these things. We're really like exploiting all of this, right? We're trying to make use of it. So I'm going to go through some what might feel like downer slides for a second. But we're going to talk about climate change and what it affects, just so you're aware, because the more you know, the more you can manage your garden. So everything is connected with warmer climates and with movement. Some of this is just people moving things around, but some of it is about climate change. Insects move around all the time. They come in, through ports, through trains, through car wheels, through through plants that are moved around. And so sometimes they just don't survive, though, because this is not the right climate for them. But as climates change, then some insects can get a hold. So examples of that are the 2 stink bugs I mentioned, the southern green and the brown marmorated. This picture is from the first year we heard about them on the hotline, and we were one of the first people to hear about this, even before WSU was really fully aware, in the extension and the master gardeners. We actually sent all this info to them, and we started collecting info to share with them. And now the extension agencies are all tracking both of these pests. The southern green stink bug got here in 2014 in a pea patch in central Seattle. And then we saw it sort of radiate out from there. It looks very much like our native green stink bug when it's mature, but it looks very different in its instar stages and nymph stages. It has these spots on it rather than stripes. So the other ones have stripes. And at one point, it has a bright pink section and a very, very green section, and they're very colorful. They're actually quite beautiful, but they love to eat everything. Obviously on the basil, they love tomatoes, they love green beans. They mate in the fava beans in the spring, so look for them there, and they will be the adult green bugs mating. You'll see them on top of each other. If you can get them at that stage, they won't lay eggs. So also along with this, we've seen more of the native stink bugs than we have in the past. But again, they're not quite as problematic. The brown marmorated is the bigger pest. it looks very much like our native brown stink bug, except that the antenna and its legs have white stripes in them. So they have sort of like clear white striping, and they have their shoulder arrangement is a little different. You can look up those details to be able to identify them. But the state wants to know about both of these, in particular brown marmorated. This is a huge pest in the orchards in Eastern Washington. So then if we have an overabundance of prey, that makes it harder. Now we have new insects here. One of the, some of the work that the WSDA is doing, they came up to our farm down in Southeast Seattle to look at our population. We had a huge population of these guys, and they wanted to see what was going on. They took samples of them because they wanted to see if there was any predation happening from native predators that affect our native stink bugs. And they fortunately did see some evidence of that. So that's a good thing, except that now that means there's a whole lot more, things that need to be dealt with. And so it takes time to balance that system back out. When we have longer growing seasons, we can have more pests and disease generations in 1 year. So that butterfly that I showed you, the imported cabbage worm butterfly, usually at least 2 generations. Sometimes we're seeing 3 or more. So that affects it because they're out longer in the year, and then you have more damage from them. Pathogens that can survive warmer winters. And then there's species interactions we don't even know about. We don't know how things are affecting each other. So all of this has an impact, and it's just for us to keep our eyes open and be aware and tracking things and sharing where it's important to share. Timing is everything. Phenology matters. If something's blooming but the pollinator is not out at the same time, then you're not going to get fruit on it. If you're looking for plums, for instance, part of that is we just get rainy springs, and so that can affect things. But if it's too cool in the winter for something to come out, and you don't have the mason bees out at the time that the plum tree is blooming, when there's phenology changes, that's going to matter. Or if something starts to bloom at the wrong time. So there can be also seasonal changes in migration of these guys moving around, and maybe they don't get here in time to pollinate something. Mismatching of food sources. So if the Oregon grape is not blooming at the right time, hummingbirds in the Northwest, Anna's hummingbirds really depend on that. And so you want to make sure that it's not like happening too late into the spring, that it's actually an earlier bloom. So we don't control all of this. So climate change can affect phenology, and it can affect all of that. It can also affect how heavy our rains are. We might get more flooding. This could cause soil compaction. It may mean that you can't work your fields. So we work with a lot of farmers who grow plant starts for our plant sales at Tilt. And they have had this issue happen in the last few years where they couldn't get out and get things planted. They had huge flooding issues. It could affect how they're managing crops in their greenhouse. Last year, there were huge issues with the rats eating things. Every grower we worked with had rat issues because there weren't things in the environment. It was a cold, long spring with low growth rates, and so rats were looking for food, and they came in and ate their crops. So we didn't get eggplants and peppers and some things that we were expecting because of that. Cold can damage things that are blooming too early. I actually have seen some things blooming this fall that don't bloom in the fall, they bloom in the spring. And then sometimes you'll see things that stay out too late, like bumblebee queens need to be going to bed, and they usually bed down earlier, but you don't want them out in November. It gets too wet for them. They need to find a dry space to hang out until they can build their colony next year. So all these things can cause stresses. And one of the things that's really been interesting to see as they've done research on this is that many invasive weeds actually adapt to higher CO2 atmospheres. So the more carbon in the air, the better they grow. So it's to our benefit to not have a lot of carbon in the air, because then we can not have to battle knotweed quite as much. Weed infestations often lead to more pesticide use, but the more you use a pesticide, the more the efficacy of it can decrease and the less effective it becomes. There can be a lot of nutrient runoff because of heavy rains, which causes algal blooms, and that affects fish and salmon, which affects, orcas. So everything's connected. Everything has an effect. We can manage what we can in our own gardens. So the more we do to, keep soil healthy, to have diverse yards, all of that's going to help us manage all of this as we have to adapt to changing climate. And, choosing the right plants for your yard is going to mean you have success for, a healthy garden. So know the mature size of your plant before you plant it, so you don't have to prune it if you don't need to. Most plants don't need to be pruned all the time, shouldn't have to be, especially trees. You want to know the needs of your plant, so you're putting it in the right place. So what kind of sun, shade, soil type, soil moisture, what kind of fertility. Something like a lavender, for instance, likes it drier, likes it sunnier, doesn't need a lot of fertility, likes good drainage, can handle some wind and exposure. They're Mediterranean. They grow on the hillsides above the Mediterranean Sea. So also knowing where a plant comes from can help to guide you. But make choices that are going to be good for the plant. It's going to cause less work for you in the long run and healthier plants. If you're looking to do some experimentation for climate adaptation, think about plants that grow south of us, especially things that are also native here. So maybe for like a Douglas fir that grows in Southern Oregon, because that DNA of that particular plant, if you clone that and you bring it north, or have seeds from that and bring it north, it will be more adapted to the climate that's in that area, and it will be more successful here as our climate changes. An example of this is up at Stossel Creek. City Light and Mountains to Sound Greenway are doing a planting project out there they've been working on for quite a few years. And they're using species native to Washington, but sourced in Southern Oregon. So it's going to look like our forests look. It's just going to have different genotypes of those plants growing up here. You can experiment with warmer weather crop plants. So things that might, maybe would grow better in California could grow here. And we've been doing that for years. Gardeners have been pushing that envelope for years. Nothing wrong with experimentation, pushing the boundaries of your planting seasons. If you have microclimate areas, think about, things that could be more successful there. And then again, connecting those habitat corridors and choosing trees that remove pollutants. There's lots of lists of trees that actually take pollutants out of the air. These are mitigation techniques, to help manage the change. So this is one of my favorite things to share with people is choose plants in these three families. This is the carrot family, Apiaceae, Asteraceae is daisy, and Lamiaceae is the mint family. Familiar characters in that are lavender, thyme, sage, rosemary, mint, oregano, marjoram, etc. So all of those Mediterranean herbs, they're all in that same family. These are super pollinator attractors and other beneficial insects, but great for bees. Things in the daisy family can include things like the syringium that you see, or not the syringium, the dahlia that you see here on the left, and then also things like, Shasta daisy or yarrow or cosmos, calendula, marigold, sunflower. These are all things we're growing anyway. And then in the Apiaceae, in the carrot family, you see the eryngium here, or let a carrot go to seed and flower. Fennel, dill, cilantro, spread cilantro seed all over. Even if you don't, I don't like to eat it. I'm one of those people with that soapy taste gene. So I don't like it, but I grow it because it's great for the garden. It's great for pollinators. It self seeds. I like the seed. I like the coriander from it, but you can grow it as a plant that will actually improve the pollinator population in your garden. But we grow these anyway, so just be purposeful, add lots of them. That will help keep a healthy and diverse garden. And then, of course, choosing native plants in general, native fauna, recognize native flora. Again, this is like I said before, the Anna's hummingbirds, who, by the way, weren't living here 25 years ago. They didn't overwinter here. So again, that's a change that's happened over time. And we don't know, maybe we'll start seeing the rufous stay around. We don't know, what's going to happen. But having those winter blooming plants is super important for them. They have a really fast metabolism. They need some food. We can hang feeders out, certainly, and that's okay. But having plants also, they love rosemary. My rosemary's already blooming. So it's actually got little tiny blue flowers. It's the antithesis of what we think of when we think of hummingbird attracting plants, but they love it. They're all over it. And I have a really late blooming clematis that has little tiny kind of yellowish bell shaped flowers. They're all over that. So both of those still have some blooms on them. And so there's food in my front yard for them right now. But create that habitat, think about the layers, think about the scale of your garden. Wildlife will become familiar with your landscape and come back to it. Most native plants are adapted to this climate and have fewer problems, which means you need fewer pesticides to manage them. All right, so this is where I want you guys to have a little bit of input. Garden review and planning starts now, really. I mean, really, I'm doing this all year long. I'm sort of taking notes and making, notice of things. But you can do this in many ways. It comes with a cup of coffee always, or tea, whatever you like. And then use a book, use a computer, whatever works for you to track. I use my phone a lot. I use a little note section and just jot things down really quickly so that I don't lose it if I'm out there looking at something, or even if I'm at work, especially. But I also like paper journals. So sometimes I'll transfer that to a paper journal. But so I know people that use like garden calendars. There's all kinds of ways to do this. But what we want to think about is what happened this year. So this is 2023, looking at the Seattle trends, which I just grabbed those trends because they're easy to find. So we had 68 consecutive days of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. It was the second longest warm temperature record in recorded history, 72 days back in 2017. So both of these long record temperature streaks are recent. CTEC measure of rainfall was pretty low. So we only had an inch of rain from July to September. Normally we get at least 2.5 inches of rain around. And then, so from January to the end of summer, our rainfall was 8 inches below normal. And then, so dry, and then this long spell. So this affected our garden. How did it affect it? Like, what did we see? We're predicted to have above average temps and below average rainfall through the fall. That's why you're hearing from Seattle Public Utilities and other water districts about conserving water. So most water utilities right now are asking people to voluntarily conserve. And it's not that we don't have enough right now, it's just that we didn't get that rainfall. And so they're trying to be proactive and anticipate as we get into the next year. If we see this El Nino winter going on and we don't get a lot of rainfall, then we will have a water shortage next year. So we want to be ahead of that. Coldest day to date this past year was in February, and the highest rainfall date just happened in early November. So, but that's it. I mean, we still haven't had a whole lot more rain. All right, so these are some of the things that I'm looking at every year. When's the earliest bloom in the garden? What was it? So while I'm saying these things, you guys take notes. Think about what you saw. What was your first bloom in your garden? And we all have different plants, obviously. Some of what I look at too is when did that the armlaria bloom in the forest areas. So the osoberry, when did it bloom? Because it's one of the first things that blooms. It's a deciduous shrub that has the leaves start to come out and they sort of stick up and the little white flower hangs down. That's one of the earliest things blooming. And so I'm often tracking when that is. When was the first emergence of a plant pest that you saw or a beneficial insect? And who was it? When was it? How did the soil change? And if you don't use a soil thermometer right in your garden, and this is a good tool to have in particular for veggie beds, but you can also consult this map at this link here. And this is a map I took a picture of yesterday. So the soil temperature in the Seattle area, this is measured at the Center for Urban Horticulture over on the Union Bay areas, was 46. But if you radiate out, you'll see it's much lower everywhere else. And it's colder as you get up into the foothills, of course. And then over in Eastern Washington, the soil's pretty chilly. But along the Puget Sound area, it's fairly warm. Looks like the Seattle area is the warmest. These are actual weather stations. So you would find the one closest to you and sort of extrapolate from that. And you can go to this map and go specifically to the station that you want. You can look at air temps, rainfall, all kinds of info. Super useful tool. All right, so what was your most problematic pest? Was it a mammal? Was it an insect? What plant were they affecting? Or was it the ground? Was it your lawn? Which weeds were the hardest for you to manage? And what did you do to manage it? And did it work? Are these common issues in your garden? So I'm going to go back to this one. So first, I just want to hear from anybody who's willing to share. What was your earliest bloom? Who noticed what?
Feel free to unmute yourself or input in the chat box. I think I remember the rhododendrons blooming pretty quick. There's this one that always blooms right before all the others. And it was a lot earlier this year than in years past.
Anybody else? How about a plant pest? What was the first pest that you saw? And do you remember when?
I think it was those stink bugs. Those darn stink bugs.
Stink bug. January. Oh my God. No. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
Okay. And then in the next page, whoops. All right. So what was your most problematic pest? Oh, squirrels digging up bulbs and plants. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Holy moly, those guys.
They just make you go nuts.
Mammals are always my biggest problem. I do get a lot of squirrels. They actually try to dig, and I have little pots on my front porch railing that have in the summer have different things in them. They had lobelia this year, which was really fun. Just lobelia. They have pansies in them right now, but they keep knocking them over because they're digging trying to find some, or digging trying to plant something. And they're little, and they're not, they don't support squirrel digging. But yeah, I keep finding them on the ground. I see sometimes, this year I did see some at work at our work garden, some aphids in late summer on our kale that was kind of like spent out that we'd harvested a lot. And so the aphids finally got to it. Part of that though was a watering issue that it was hot and dry, and we were having a hard time keeping up on getting it watered deeply enough. So had we had it watered better, we probably would have been able to keep it at bay. What we did to manage that was to harvest what was good still and pull it. At that point, it was like time to go, but that was really late. That was like September. So kale can overwinter, but we didn't get to overwinter that because it just got too funky with aphids. Thinking about if these are common issues, are these things you've seen before, or are they things that are new to you? If they're new to you, how do you find out more about them? There's a ton of information on the internet. Agricultural colleges have tons of info, but of course, you can always call the hotline. That's what we're here for. You can send us photos. We can help you to sort of sort out what's been going on. This chart sort of shows like all the different ways you manage pests. Host plant resistance is one of them. So some things are more susceptible to things like roses that don't get black spot or powdery mildew. Cultural controls, how you manage that plant. If you put it in the wrong place to begin with, you're going to have issues. There's all kinds of mechanical controls, like putting floating row cover over plants that get those imported cabbage worms on them so that you never get them. The adult can't lay their eggs there, then you never have a problem. Thinking about all that, and then you can use sprays and different things, but again, be careful before you know what's happening, because you have biological controls happening by nature, and you don't want to mess with that. And then, of course, use your chemical controls last. All right, what about your plants? Which plants did best in your garden? What didn't grow well? Why do you think that? Did anything do poorly that has done well in the past? Did you change any gardening practices? Or did anything in the garden environment change? So like I mentioned, sometimes people put buildings up and shaded a garden, or we had a coworker who had a bunch of construction behind her house. She lived at the bottom of the hill, and there was construction going on up the hill above her, and there was construction wash sort of coming down the hill, which included, excuse me, cement, sort of cement tailings, so, like stuff in the water that was running off the hillside, and it actually changed the color of her hydrangeas because there's lime in that. And so she could track that based on what had happened in her garden. So Fran Cozine says, I have aphids on my kale right now. It depends on how many you have. You can wash off aphids with water. Aphids are soft-bodied. When they overwinter, at this point, they start to become winged, and they will move around and overwinter. So it's good to get rid of them in any way you can. Ideally, water sprays can knock them down. They're too weak to like just climb right back on the plant. And usually predators pick them off as well. Sometimes you can use a little bit of soapy water on them. But again, look to see those parasitoid wasps might still be active. Look to see if they are. And look for those bloated tan bodies to see if they're actually working. You can send us pictures at the hotline. We can look for you as well. Excuse me. But if all else fails, if that kale has been growing all spring, it's not a bad, it's okay if you pull it up. It's going to go through the winter just fine. But if it has a bunch of aphids on it, next spring, all it's going to do is bolt and bloom. And so it's not going to last that long anyway. You could start over in the spring with something new. And Mary says her lettuce, my lettuce is beautiful too. I had the best lettuce. I think we had that long, cool, wet spring, that was it was damp, and it was just the best for the lettuce crops. My kale right now, I have one called Rainbow Lacinato, which is kind of a bright purple at the moment, and it's growing really, really well. It was in the same bed. My cucumber did nothing. I had cucumber, I planted it 3 times by little transplants, and they just kept wilting up. I couldn't keep the water on them enough at the time I planted them to keep them alive. And usually I get cucumber in abundance in my raised bed, and it was terrible. Anybody else?
We did have Brenda before. Have a couple questions. When in the year do ladybugs start uh
Uh,
pupillating, especially on fruit trees? I want to avoid killing them with neem.
they pupate at different times, because they could have multiple generations, but I would say they're usually out in about April. Interestingly, I've seen them in mint. They seem to like mint to mate in. So they're like hanging out in the mint, making babies essentially. Then they go and lay all their eggs. And then those eggs hatch into larvae. So that's pretty much a spring, early summer phenomenon. And then after that, so anytime from May on, you should be checking for them. But you can look and see them if they're there. If you see evidence of lady beetles, then pay attention. If you don't, they may not be pupating on that plant, and it's safe to do what you need to do.
Oh,
And then your next question about what do the stink bugs overwinter in? That's a great question. They as I said, you'll see the mating and fava bean in the spring, but where I've seen them in the fall and through the winter is on things like calendula that have seeded and sunflowers that have seeded. They're eating the seeds at that point. So you can see multiple generations in the late fall and through the winter on those kind of seeded, heavy, juicy seeds that they're eating on. And then they are anywhere in the environment near there. So typically they'll move into things like your fava bean crop, and they'll be there for the winter. So things that are growing in green in the winter time in the veggie garden are typically where they overwinter. All right. So when you're preparing for 2024, you want to evaluate what you did. Were your plant choices good? Was your placement good? Did it work or didn't? I know my sister does this because she moves her plants all the time. She's employed me and her husband many times to move things around. I tell that story too, Brenda, by the way, about moving your plants around. Right now she can't. She has an excuse, so she can't. But increase the number of native plants and plants for beneficials in your garden. Make sure that you have lots of them. These are great plants anyway. They're beautiful. A lot of times people think about native plants sort of run of the mill. Oh, just a bunch of salal. There are so many beautiful native plants, even the deciduous shrubs, which we forget about. So there's red flowering currant, and there's mock orange, and the ocean sprays, and the nine barks. Those guys are gorgeous plants. They're pretty in the winter. Most of them, some of them have, like red stem dogwood, have beautiful, winter color. They have flowers. Some of them are fragrant. They have pretty leaves on them. They're great shrubbery where birds can kind of nest and hide and get away from predators. And they're really, really helpful for the garden. You want to make notes on what your pest issues were and when to expect them next year. Thinking about that. If you're paying attention, like I said, I started seeing those beneficial wasps. We were doing a little film for the hotline, just a little educational film, and it wasn't even about that, but we were in the garden and I started I was just looking at the broccoli plants and noticed them flying around. Make a plan for how you're going to keep your soil healthy and how you're going to water. Think about what worked and what didn't, where you need to improve soil and don't. I had a conversation with a ex-coworker the other day who's a very, very accomplished gardener and also a garden speaker, Lisa Taylor, who's, all over, speaks all over the place and knows her stuff. But she had issues with some starts not growing well. And we talked about it for a while. And she noticed that I asked her about what soil she uses, what potting soil. She noticed that soil had changed a little bit. It was a little more woody than normal, and her seedlings weren't growing very well. And so, you have to evaluate things all the time. Things change, products change, your garden changes, soil gets depleted over time. You can do soil testing as well to see early in the spring. It's a good idea to, send it off. You can send it to King Conservation District for free soil testing, depending on where you live. But you can also send it to other labs and just get a good nutritional analysis so you can see what you actually need, rather than just putting a bunch of stuff in there that maybe you don't need to spend money on. This is seed catalog time. I've started to get them. They're starting to come in. Consult the seed catalogs. There's a tremendous amount of info in there. They also include a lot of these other plants I was talking about in the mint, carrot, and daisy families, many of which are edible plants or herbs or edible flowers that you can use. And then try something new. Start thinking about those adaptive plants. One of the things we're experimenting with right now is we have 3 avocado trees that are in pots that were given to us by a gentleman who has an organization called Dremifolia Collective, and he is experimenting with what avocados are more cold tolerant. And so as climate changes, but also you have genotypes that you can adapt that can take colder temperatures. We may be able to have some avocado trees in the environment here. And so he gave us 3 different varieties that we're testing. They are sitting in our greenhouse at the farm currently over the winter, but that greenhouse is unheated, so it gets pretty chilly in there at night and during cold days. And we've noticed that one of the 3 actually had a little cold damage on it already. The other 2 look beautiful still. So this is information for him to be able to track what's going on with the different species and varieties that he's trying. So that's just an example of something sort of fun that we're trying out. But, you could do things like, get a hold of, if you want to replace and put a conifer in your yard, that you want to grow to be this big, beautiful tree. And we know that if things are drier here in the summer, certain cedars are going to have more trouble. Maybe get a cedar that's adapted to a little bit drier climate that comes from Southern Oregon and try replacing that as well. These are our sponsors. So the Garden Hotline is a free service for you to call, email, visit the website. So the website has articles. It has the classes we're doing currently in other places. It has lists of brochures that you can download or just look at online. And then it has a whole bunch of, there's a Garden Hotline resource page, with a bunch of PDFs with fact sheets, including where to test soils, where to find soil products, what plants attract pollinators and beneficials, a lot of really good stuff there. So I would encourage you to visit that, but also call us and email if you need help with things. There's a form on the website also to send a question. We are at Tilth Alliance. Hotlines managed by Tilth Alliance. We have staff who work on the program, and we answer the phone and emails 6 days a week, so Monday through Saturday. Plus, we're out and about in person in the community as well. We work with a lot of community gardens. We work with a lot of refugee and immigrant garden organizations and social service agencies to help support those gardens. And it's all funded by the Hazardous Waste Management Program, Seattle Public Utilities, the Rainwise Program, and Cascade Water Alliance. And all of these guys' interest, of course, is in resource conservation and pesticide reduction, which is why we do what we do. But we're all gardeners. And of course, since we're at Tilth, we're very interested in food gardening as well. But we can talk to you about lawns, trees, shrubs, whatever you like. And I just encourage you to, keep track of what you see. To me, one of the most fun things about gardening is the learning and the exploration. Like, I love when we talk about integrated pest management, part of it is sort of that that science of, tracking things, being a detective. What happened here? Why? What kind of damage is this? Is that a rabbit bite or is that slugs? Who ate this thing? Um, but part of it is motivated by I want to mitigate that, but a lot of it is just that I find it very interesting, and so I love to learn about it as well. And I'd like to learn with other people. Again, whatever you guys know and your expertise, we welcome hearing about. We have a lot of social media too. If you want to interact with us there, you can share your own experiences as well. Any other questions?
Any questions? Feel free to enter them in the chat box if you're shy. Oh, Mary said, thank you for the interesting and enjoyable presentation.
Good. Thank you, Mary.
Well, Laura and I are putting together next year's schedule, and it is looking really, really wonderful. If there is any particular gardening topics that you're interested in, I'm sure that there's information on the Garden Hotline website, or if there is a certain topic you are interested in, the lovely Laura here presenting with our online platform, feel free to message either of us, and we'll do our best to accommodate.
And one of the things Elizabeth and I have been talking about is some trying to do some classes that involve interactive things. So continuing to do online, but having supplies or having, things that you would use sort of to practice what we're doing. And we're still working all that out. But for instance, like growing microgreens, is an example of something we can teach about and how to do it, and then, buying the supplies to do that. And of course, Marlene's would have that available for you. But, growing microgreens is super fun because you don't need to have too many fancy things, but you could also have fancy things. So, but we can teach how to do that, and then you can actually practice it.
Yes, and for the folks here still on the line, that is going to be January 6th at 10 a.m. So mark your calendars now. The info for the register link will be on our website shortly, but I'm really excited for that class because there's so much good nutrients jam-packed into those microgreens. My favorite is broccoli. And also mustard greens. The mustard greens are spicy, but the broccoli sprouts, they are really, they're just anti everything, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, antibacterial, can help support in the prevention of overactive cancer cells. There's just many benefits to the cruciferous family, especially.
You can
So
do all sorts of fun things too. Like you can even grow melon seedlings.
oh yeah, that's right. Oh, I wonder what those taste like.
Tastes good.
Ooh. Oh yeah, and pea microgreens are really good. Sunflower. I love kohlrabi though.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Oh, everyone's saying thank you. Yeah, thank yous from Fran and C and Joanne. Well, thank you everyone. We super appreciate you tuning in. Um, I hope that y'all have had a wonderful gardening season, and these classes have helped um, contribute by giving you insight and access to the lovely Laura Matter here and the Garden Hotline resource. Definitely check out their website if you haven't. There is a plethora of information and free brochures on there that you can download. Also, if you haven't already, all of our classes are streamed onto our Facebook Facebook pages, either our Tacoma or our Federal Way Facebook page, depending on the day of the week. And those get uploaded to our YouTube channel. And I've been organizing all of the gardening classes over the last several years as its own playlist. So you can go through the playlist and play around and learn some fabulous gardening knowledge. I'm gonna see if we have anyone here on the live stream. Looks like there's no questions. But we thank you very much for those of you that were here live in the Zoom meeting and watching live on Facebook or watching the preview. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to the Garden Hotline. They're a fantastic support and community resource. And a special big thanks to Laura Matter here. It's been a pleasure working with you, Laura, and looking forward to another fantastic year.
Yep, super fun. Love it.
Yay! So have fun and get to gardening. Bye.
Thanks, guys.